The X-Men have one of the deepest villain rosters in all of comics, from ancient gods to psychic parasites to a guy whose main power is being really good at jumping. So today, we're going through every major mutant villain and breaking down what makes them tick, starting with the most iconic one of all, Magneto. Here's the thing about Magneto. When he first appeared in 1963, he was just a generic bad guy in a cape. Zero backstory, zero philosophy. Then Chris Claremont gave him a Holocaust survivor origin in 1981, and suddenly everything changed. He went from a guy who wanted to take over the world because that's what villains do, to a man whose militant philosophy stems from watching his people get systematically exterminated. That's not a villain. That's a guy who decided never again and meant it literally. Power-wise, he's an Omega-level mutant, planetary-scale magnetic manipulation, electromagnetic pulses, and if he's feeling particularly unfriendly, he can manipulate the iron in your blood, which is, not ideal, but at least Magneto has the dignity of being taken seriously. The next villain on our list? Not so much. Toad. Mortimer Toynbee debuted in 1964 as Magneto's hunchbacked, sniveling servant, and he was designed from the ground up to be pathetic. Like, intentionally pathetic. Lee and Kirby created him as comic relief, the guy whose entire job was to grovel and make Magneto look more intimidating by comparison. Here's the thing though, somewhere along the way, someone at Marvel decided Toad needed an upgrade, and then another upgrade, and then about 14 more. The man can leap 25 feet vertically, has a 30-foot prehensile tongue that secretes paralytic adhesive resin and acid, strong enough to dissolve most materials, and later picked up pyrokinetic tongue abilities, pheromone-based mind control, wall crawling, ultraviolet and infrared vision, and the ability to psychically communicate with amphibians. He also designed and built Magneto's mutation device, because apparently he's an engineer now. He went from "please don't hit me, sir" to having one of the most absurdly stacked power sets in X-Men history, which is, quite the career trajectory. But if Toad's glow-up seems ridiculous, wait until you meet the guy who made the Phoenix go insane. Mastermind. Most mutant villains want to hurt. Mastermind wants you to not even know it's happening. Jason Wingard debuted alongside Toad back in March 1964 in the X-Men Number 4, and while Toad was busy being Magneto's punching bag, Mastermind was quietly being the most terrifying person, and his psionic illusions don't just trick your eyes. They hit all 5 senses simultaneously. Sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. You can't tell what's real, which is, not ideal. But here's where he really earned his spot. During the Dark Phoenix saga, Mastermind manipulated Jean Grey herself, projecting illusions directly into the consciousness of one of the most powerful beings in the universe. He needed the White Queen's mind tap mechanism to pull it off, which honestly makes it scarier. Even at his absolute peak, he had to cheat to reach that level, and he still almost won. The real kicker. His daughters inherited his powers, but stronger. Martinique can hypnotize entire cities into believing they've been transported to different historical eras. Regan's illusions keep working even after she loses consciousness. The power got worse with each generation, like a family heirloom nobody asked for. But if Mastermind proves you don't need strength to be dangerous, the next entry proves you absolutely do. Juggernaut. So quick asterisk on this one, we're making a video about mutant villains, and Juggernaut is not a mutant. His powers come from a magical gem belonging to an extra-dimensional deity named Sidorak. That's not genetics, that's literally sorcery. He is the only non-mutant to hold a Brotherhood membership card, which is a little awkward for a mutant supremacist organization, but nobody ever told him to leave, and honestly, look at the guy, would you? Here's what the gem of Sidorak actually does. Once Cain Marco is in motion, he cannot be stopped. Not slowed, not redirected, not stopped. He has strength sufficient to shatter mountains, zero physical fatigue, and a mystical force field that makes him invulnerable to most forms of attack. But here's where it gets genuinely stupid. During the Trian saga, Juggernaut accessed the full power of the gem, gaining a 1,000-fold increase. Suddenly, he could alter matter, project energy, levitate, and open portals through space and time. At that point, he's basically a god who got there through a rock he found in a cave. Oh, and he's also Professor Xavier's stepbrother, so every X-Men fight is technically a family dispute. Thanksgiving must be unbearable, but family drama aside, Juggernaut is a kitten compared to what's coming next. Sabretooth. Victor Creed is the answer to a question nobody wants to ask. What happens if Wolverine stops trying? Because that's exactly what Sabretooth is. Same claws, same healing factor, same superhuman senses that can track a single person across a city by smell alone. Nearly identical mutations down to the molecular level. And yet one became an X-Man and the other became a serial killer. Here's the thing. Creed first showed up in Iron Fist number 14 back in 1977 as a generic murderer called the Slasher, with zero connection to the X-Men. It wasn't until the 1986 Mutant Massacre crossover that Chris Claremont locked him in as Wolverine's archenemy. And the reason it works is because their fights literally never end. Every encounter follows the same pattern. They tear each other apart, both go down, and whoever wakes up first wins. Two functionally identical predators separated by one thing. Logan chose to fight his animal side. Victor didn't. That's the whole difference. Not power, not skill, just a decision. Sabretooth looked at everything ugly inside himself and said, yeah, this is fine, which is, not ideal. But if the idea of Wolverine's evil twin unsettles you, wait until you meet the woman who can become literally anyone she wants. Mystique's family tree is so absurd it reads like a soap opera written by someone who genuinely hates you. Raven Darkholme is the biological mother of Nightcrawler, conceived with the demon mutant Azazel. She's the biological mother of Graydon Creed, conceived with Sabretooth, and she's the adoptive mother of Rogue. That's three of the most important characters in X-Men history, all tracing back to one blue woman with commitment issues. Here's the thing, she's been alive since at least 1783. Over 2 centuries of documented history, and she spent most of it deceiving literally everyone around her. Her shapeshifting isn't some cheap party trick either. She duplicates retina patterns, fingerprints, skin pore patterns, and voice prints with perfect precision. The only limitation is she can't copy mutant powers, which is, not ideal when you're pretending to be Wolverine and someone asks you to pop the claws, but here's where it gets genuinely wild. After radiation exposure, her powers went completely off the rails. Night vision, wings, talons, natural body armor. She can compress her body to near 2-dimensional flatness and glide on air currents. She can grow multiple heads and extra limbs. At that point, she's not a shapeshifter anymore. She's basically a biological Swiss Army knife having an identity crisis. But if Mystique operates in the shadows, the next villain ran an entire secret empire from a velvet throne. Emma Frost. Emma Frost is the rich villain in a franchise built entirely around oppression. That's the tension, and it's what makes her fascinating. Every other X-Men antagonist has some tragic backstory about persecution or survival. Emma was born into a wealthy Boston family, built her own financial empire through Frost International, and climbed to the top of the Hellfire Club as the White Queen. She wasn't fighting for mutant survival. She was already winning at capitalism. Her telepathy is powerful enough to read minds and project thoughts across massive distances, which is scary enough on its own. But then, she developed a secondary mutation that lets her encase her entire body in a diamond-like crystalline form. So now she's reading your thoughts, and she's basically bulletproof, which is, not ideal for anyone standing across from her. But here's where Emma gets genuinely interesting. She eventually left the Hellfire Club behind and became headmistress at Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. Full hero turn, teaching kids, fighting alongside the X-Men. And the debate that's been raging ever since is whether any of it is real. Did Emma Frost actually grow as a person, or did she just calculate that the winning side had better long-term returns? Nobody knows. And honestly, she'd probably prefer it that way. Speaking of the Hellfire Club, Emma wasn't running it alone. Let's talk about the man sitting at the head of that table, Sebastian Shaw. Here's the thing about most villains. You can punch them really hard and the problem goes away. Sebastian Shaw is the opposite of that. His mutant ability absorbs kinetic energy and converts it directly into physical strength. So the harder you hit him, the stronger he gets. Every punch, every kick, every bullet is basically a protein shake for this guy, which means the absolute worst strategy against Sebastian Shaw is the one every superhero defaults to. Hit him harder. Congratulations, you just made him stronger. That's not a superpower, that's a cheat code. He debuted in Uncanny X-Men 129 in January 1980, right alongside Emma Frost, and artist John Byrne based his look on British actor Robert Shaw. But Shaw's real danger was never the energy absorption. It was the suit and tie. He ran the Hellfire Club's New York branch, presenting himself as a completely legitimate businessman while secretly pulling strings behind every major power structure he could get his hands on. And here's the kicker. He funded the Sentinel program, a mutant bankrolling robots designed to hunt mutants. Not because he hated his own kind, but because controlling the thing that hunts you is better than running from it. That's not villainy, that's corporate strategy. He basically turned mutant genocide into a business expense he could write off. But if Shaw represents the cold, calculating side of mutant villainy, the next one is pure unhinged chaos with a lighter. Pyro. St. John Allardyce is a fire controller who cannot create fire. Let that sink in for a sec. His entire mutant ability is manipulating and shaping existing flames, bending them into constructs he calls the living flame within about 100 yards. He can make fire grow, shrink, twist into giant flaming fists, whatever he wants, but he cannot make a single spark on his own, which means he has to carry a kerosene-based flamethrower built into his costume just to have something to work with. Take away the flamethrower, and Pyro is just a guy named St. John standing in a room with zero fire and zero powers. That's like being the world's greatest surfer, but you can't swim to the ocean. Here's the thing though, that limitation is exactly what makes him more interesting than every generic fire-throwing mutant in Marvel's roster. He's resistant to flames he mentally controls, but still vulnerable to fire he doesn't. So if someone else lights a match and throws it at him before he can grab it psychically, he burns like anybody else, which is, not ideal. Aaron Stanford's portrayal in X2 and The Last Stand leaned into the psychological radicalization angle. You watch this kid go from uncertain teenager to full-blown Magneto disciple in real time. Magneto didn't just recruit Pyro, he manufactured him, but a guy who needs a lighter to be dangerous is practically cuddly compared to what's coming next. Lady Deathstrike. Most villains on this list were born with their powers or had them forced on them against their will. Lady Deathstrike walked into an alien body modification shop and said, "Make me into a weapon." And that's exactly what happened. Yuriko Oyama first showed up in Daredevil 109.7 in August 1983, which is a weird place to debut considering she'd become one of Wolverine's most personal enemies. Her vendetta against Logan was baked in from the start because her father, Lord Darkwind, developed the adamantium bonding process. The same process forcibly applied to Wolverine during Weapon X. So in her mind, Logan was walking around wearing her father's stolen legacy in his bones. Here's the thing though, before she ever got upgraded, she was already terrifying. Electromagnetically tempered katana, shuriken, armor-piercing, explosive ammunition. That's not a person who needed superpowers. That's a person who chose them anyway. She went to Spiral's alien body shop and got the full package. Adamantium skeletal lacing, 12-inch adamantium claws replacing every finger, each capable of extending to double its length, and computer interface abilities that let her download data directly into her brain. She literally turned herself into Wolverine's mirror image out of pure spite. Wolverine didn't ask for his claws. She demanded hers, which is, not ideal for Logan. But if one woman with a grudge and adamantium fingers is scary, wait until you meet a mutant who's been conquering civilizations since ancient Egypt. Apocalypse. Most villains on this list think in terms of years, maybe decades if they're ambitious. Apocalypse thinks in millennia. En-Sabah-Nur, translated as the first one, was born thousands of years ago in ancient Egypt, abandoned at birth because he looked like a monster, then picked up by a nomadic warrior who decided the best use for a mutant baby was slavery, which is, not ideal. But here's the thing, his emerging mutant powers eventually let him overthrow every single master he ever had, and then he just kept going. For thousands of years, the guy has been conquering civilizations since before most civilizations existed. His powers are absurd, even by mutant standards. Molecular manipulation lets him alter his size, shape, and density at will. He regenerates from practically anything. He can genetically engineer other mutants, and he literally did exactly that to create Mr. Sinister, personally enhancing Nathaniel Essex from a regular Victorian scientist into one of of the most dangerous beings on the planet. On top of all that, celestial technology makes him functionally immortal. He's not aging, he's not slowing down, he's been doing this longer than recorded history. And if you're wondering how he stacks up against someone like Magneto, fan analyses consistently reach the same conclusion. Despite Magneto's Omega-level electromagnetic power, Apocalypse's adaptability, energy absorption, molecular manipulation, and effective immortality make it a mismatch. Magneto is powerful. Apocalypse is eternal. Speaking of that Victorian scientist he personally upgraded, let's talk about the monster he created, M.R. Sinister. Most villains on this list were born with their powers. Sinister walked into a lab and asked for his. Nathaniel Essex was a Victorian-era scientist living in London, completely human, completely obsessed with Darwin's theories of evolution, and completely convinced he could engineer a superior species. Which is, not ideal. Here's the thing, Essex wasn't some fringe lunatic. He was a legitimate researcher who looked at natural selection and thought, I can do better. When he eventually crossed paths with Apocalypse, the ancient mutant saw potential in Essex's obsession and subjected him to extensive genetic alteration, implanting the X gene of Courier directly into his DNA. Overnight, Nathaniel Essex stopped being human. He gained molecular control over his own body, shape-shifting, enhanced durability, superhuman strength, and a lifespan that's still going centuries later. But that was just the starter kit. Sinister's real trick is collecting. He incorporates other mutants' genetic material into himself, like upgrades. Telepathy, telekinesis, concussive energy projection, all borrowed from mutants he views as walking repositories of useful code. He doesn't fight you, he studies you, clones you, and files you away for later. And later turned out to be the key word. The Krakoan age revealed that Sinister's clones weren't just backups. They were data harvesting nodes, absorbing information across decades, eventually birthing an apex AI entity called Enigma. Every scheme, every manipulation, every clone was potentially feeding something nobody even knew existed. The long game doesn't begin to describe it, but if Sinister chose to become a monster, the next entry never had a choice at all. Legend. Legion is what happens when the most powerful mutant alive can't control his own mind. David Charles Haller debuted in The New Mutants 26 in April 1985, and the very first thing they told you about him was that he's Professor Xavier's son, which is, not ideal when your dad runs a school for gifted youngsters, and you're the most psychologically unstable mutant on the planet. Here's the thing about Legion. He doesn't have a power, he has all of them. David suffers from dissociative identity disorder, and each distinct personality living inside his head manifests a completely different mutant ability. One gives him telepathy, another gives him telekinesis, another turns him into a literal werewolf. Every personality is essentially a different mutant trapped inside one body, fighting for control of the steering, and that's the horror of it. Legion doesn't choose to be dangerous. He doesn't get to choose anything. Whichever personality claws its way to the surface dictates what power he has and what he does with it. He's classified as an Omega-level mutant because the cumulative scope of his abilities is functionally limitless, and he has zero psychological coherence holding it together. That's not a villain origin story. That's a tragedy wearing a cape. The FX series Legion brought him into the mainstream, but even that show understood the core truth about David Haller. The scariest thing about him isn't what he can do, it's that he's not the one doing it. But if you think one fractured mind is terrifying, wait until you see what happens when two of the most powerful minds in mutant history merge into something neither of them can stop. Onslaught? Onslaught is the answer to a question nobody wanted asked. What if Xavier and Magneto's worst impulses fused into a single entity with zero moral restraint? Turns out, the answer is catastrophic. Here's the backstory. During a battle, Xavier used his telepathy to shut down Magneto's mind, but in doing so, Magneto's darkest psychic imprint merged with Xavier's own suppressed rage. The result was Onslaught, a sentient psionic entity that first appeared in 1995. Not a person, not a mutant, exactly. A living psychic weapon born from two of the most powerful minds on the planet, and the power set is genuinely absurd. Xavier's vast telepathy combined with Magneto's planetary-scale electromagnetic manipulation. He can read minds across enormous distances with almost no resistance. He perceives the entire world as patterns of magnetic and electrical energy, seeing the natural magnetic auras surrounding every living being. That alone would make him one of the most dangerous entities in Marvel. But then he absorbed the powers of Franklin Brian Richards and Nate Gray, and his capabilities went from terrifying to functionally incalculable. But here's what makes Onslaught genuinely unsettling beyond the power scaling. He possesses both Xavier's and Magneto's genius-level intellects, operating simultaneously. He wants to understand humanity and dominate it at the same time, two contradictory impulses running in parallel with nothing to mediate between them. The implication that these impulses existed inside both men all along is the kind of thing that recontextualizes every Xavier and Magneto scene you've ever read, which is, not ideal. But if a psychic entity born from two people is disturbing, wait until you meet the thing that was born alongside Xavier himself, Cassandra Nova. Every villain on this list has done something terrible. Cassandra Nova made them all look like amateurs. Created by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely, she first appeared in New X-Men Jubbers 114 in July 2001, and she immediately committed the single deadliest act in X-Men history. Not a battle, not a war, a genocide. 16 million mutants on Genosha wiped out in a single afternoon. She manipulated Donald Trask into deploying Wild Sentinels against an entire mutant nation, and when the dust settled, there was nothing left. An entire civilization gone, just like that. But here's where it gets truly unsettling. Cassandra Nova isn't even a mutant. She's a Mumudrai, a parasitic entity born bodiless on the astral plane. She's Charles Xavier's twin sister, and while they were still in the womb together, Xavier sensed her evil and psychically killed her, resulting in a stillbirth. Most things would stay dead after that. Cassandra copied Xavier's DNA, built herself a new body from scratch, and came back anyway, which is, not ideal, because she came back with a grudge spanning her entire existence and psionic powers rivaling her brother's. Her telepathy is so advanced, she successfully possessed Xavier's body and hid it from every other telepath on the planet. Nobody noticed. On top of that, she's got rapid healing, astral manipulation, mental possession, genetic alteration, and the ability to hop between host bodies like she's switching outfits. You can't trap her, you can't outthink her, and you definitely can't kill her because her brother already tried that before she was even born and it didn't work. Grant Morrison looked at the X-Men's entire rogues gallery and said, what if the worst villain was literally Xavier's fault? And honestly, I don't know what to tell you. He was right. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.